Keir Starmer remained relatively mute as Israel killed 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza, and he's had little to say about Israel invading its neighbour Lebanon. But when it came to Iran firing rockets towards Israel, rockets that appear to have killed no Israelis, well, he was positively furious.
Good evening. In the last few hours, the Iranian regime has launched over 200 ballistic missiles at civilian targets in Israel. It's too soon to assess the impact fully, but I utterly condemn this attempt by the Iranian regime to harm innocent Israelis, to escalate this incredibly dangerous situation and push the region ever closer to the brink. It cannot be tolerated.
So now Keir Starmer is positively furious. Now, to respond to a couple of things he said there, firstly, there's no evidence there were actually civilian targets. When it comes to Israel, constantly there's these obfuscations. Oh yes, they may have killed thousands of civilians, but they were trying to hit military targets. Now, when it comes to Iran firing rockets into Israel, no civilians are killed. Oh, but we can assume they were hitting civilian targets, even though they went towards Mossad's headquarters and airfields, right? According to Keir Starmer, though, of everything that's happened over the past year, it's this that cannot be tolerated. Gazan hospitals bombed. Meh. Lebanon's capital bombed. Meh. Missiles fired towards Israel. Time to get the Union Jacks out because this is out of order.
We stand with Israel and we recognize her right to self-defense in the face of this aggression. Iran must stop these attacks, together with its proxies like Hezbollah. Iran has menaced the Middle East for far too long. Chaos and destruction brought not just to Israel, but to the people they live amongst in Lebanon and beyond. Make no mistake, Britain stands full square against such violence. We support Israel's reasonable demand for the security of its people.
I'm joined now by Eleanor Penny. Eleanor, great to have you on the show. My first question to you, why is Israel, for Keir Starmer, always a lady?
Good question, right? Because Israel has this very fine line to walk in terms of both its ideology and its hasbara, right? The PR that it puts out, framing itself both as this kind of strongman outpost of Western civilization facing us against the barbarians, so-called, that can do the work of keeping the world on the right side of chaos. Is the kind of messaging that we're hearing. And it also needs to be constantly under threat in order to justify the many billions of pounds of handouts that it's getting from the US, from the UK, from other supportive states. And this kind of mirrors what Israel has been saying, look at the onslaught from our enemies, but also don't worry, we have the Iron Dome, we are good to go, right? It has to kind of double talk out both sides of its mouth like that. And this is kind of bound up with the way in which the Israel-Palestine conflict is talked about. In general, it's drawing on this generalized Islamophobic moral panic to paint Palestinians as this sort of bestial, masculine force that threatens this feminized, vulnerable thing that must be protected, and anything is legitimized, anything is valid in a response to that. Now, obviously, this is ludicrous. It's also quite a good way of reframing what are, as we know, and have always been territorial and geostrategic questions of Israeli and US power in the region as a kind of face-off between good and evil, civilization and barbarity. Because if they're political problems, they require political solutions. I don't know, maybe even a ceasefire, heaven forfend, long-lasting peace negotiations. That really isn't concordant with the geostrategic interests of Israel and certainly not the interests of the Netanyahu administration. So they need to keep this ideological ball in the game. Keir Starmer, I mean, what can you say? Mr. Human Rights Lawyer. He has... let's look at the language that he used. He said he utterly condemns it, right? Let's cycle back to in October of last year and think about the language that he was using to talk about the Israeli incursion into Gaza when it first started, saying that they have every right to cut off water, to cut off vital supplies, that the so-called international rules-based order could just be ripped up and thrown away. Now, it's back. It's back and it's alive and it's kicking, but only when it comes to the defense of Israel. What can you say, really, other than this is a continued disgrace from a government that continues to, despite its mealy-mouthed talk about a ceasefire, arm Israel to the teeth? And when we are thinking about a region that is already teetering on the precipice of out-and-out conflict, which ordinary people will suffer the most cost, that are already suffering the most cost, it's doing nothing.
I mean, I've seen people sort of respond to people discussing this on Twitter saying, it is the convention that, if you call a ship her, I think you can call a nation her. But as far as I understand it, Keir Starmer doesn't call any other country her, right? There is no other country that sort of has this strange gender. He's never said Lebanon has a right to defend herself, right? Or Palestine, she has a right to a state. I don't know what you'd do if you're sort of giving that gendered language. But when it's just, he talks about Israel so differently to how he talks about any other country. And it is really, really strange. And the fact that sort of, of course, as you say, Eleanor, sort of in October last year, he was so slow to even sort of remotely condemn something. He was just like, they can cut off the water if they want. But now they have moved to this sort of, we want a ceasefire, too many innocent civilians are being killed. But he's never got out and stood in front of two Union Jacks for it, right? But the moment that some missiles are fired at Israel, even though they haven't killed any Israelis, this is where he draws the line. This is where we've got to put a stop to it. This is outrageous, because what we cannot tolerate is any country or government taking action that could possibly widen the conflict in the Middle East, right? All while we're still sending arms to Israel, right? The country that has basically caused all of this. I mean, it has, right? It has. The reason that there isn't peace in that particular region is because Israel has refused to come to any kind of peace agreement with its neighbors because it wants a bigger country than it currently has. That hasn't always been the case. Whatever your opinion on Zionism, it was the case that the Arab states surrounding Israel didn't want any Israel to exist, right? Disagree with that or agree with it. But for a very long time, we showed this on Monday's show, the Arab states have all been saying, look, if you just go back to your 1967 borders, we can have peace. But Israel doesn't want to do that, which means that there is constant war. Of course, Iran, not an Arab state, but the reason they are able to have these proxies in places such as Lebanon is because Lebanon is a very weak state, partly because Israel keeps intervening.